let me go and talk about this conference, this press conference with Jay Carney. And again, the conference is about Obamacare and its effects on employment, because, a lot of companies in the service sector have been replacing their full-time workers with part-time workers. That's why we've had this surge in part-time employment. That's why we now have record numbers of people working in the restaurant industry today. Now, we don't have record numbers of people working in all industries. The labor force is shrinking. We know that. People are leaving the labor force. Yet if you look at restaurants, we have more people than ever working in restaurants. Why? Is it because we have more restaurants than ever? No. It's because these restaurants are employing more part-time people. Let's say I owned a restaurant and I used to have, 50 waiters and busboys that worked full-time in my restaurant or my chain of restaurants, because if you have a restaurant, chances are you operate more than one. And for the purpose of Obamacare, if you operate more than one restaurant, they add them all together. And so even if you have fewer than 50 employees at any one restaurant, if all the restaurants that you own, if I own 10 restaurants and each restaurant only has 5 workers, well, I have 50 workers. So I'm subject to Obamacare. So what these restaurateurs have been doing is saying, well, I'm not going to have all these full-time workers. I'm not going to have 5 full-time workers at these restaurants. I'll have 10 part-time workers or 8 whatever they need to make it work. And so there's more people working, but there's not necessarily more hours worked. There's just more people. And the only explanation for this, because after all, why would all these restaurants simultaneously change their employment policies? Because after all, most restaurants would rather have full-time workers. I mean, it's easier not to have so many people coming in and out. You don't want to have people keep changing shifts. You don't want to have to train so many people. It makes more sense to have full-time workers. So why all of a sudden would there be this big shift in so many companies, at the same time deciding now, after all these years, that they'd rather have part-time workers? It's obvious it's because of Obamacare. Because Obamacare says that if you have part-time workers, you don't have to provide them with health care. And if you have full-time workers, you do. Now they've created an extra incentive for employers to prefer part-time workers. Even though the workers would prefer full-time employment, because of the government, that's no longer an option. Now, you would think the president would admit the obvious, just like you would think, some of these protesters would admit the obvious, in that Trayvon Martin was the aggressor and George Zimmerman shot him in self-defense. But again, nobody wants to admit the obvious. They want to dig in their heels and maintain a lie. And that's what Jay Carney is doing on behalf of his boss, President Obama. So listen to the beginning of this. Here's the question. Here's the reporter asking Jay Carney about this. Cut number 4.
About the Health Care Reform Act very quickly. A number of restaurants and low-wage employers recently have said that they're increasing their staffs largely by hiring part-time employees as opposed to full-time employees. In the act right now, it's the 30-hour-per-week mark is where full-time is set. I'm curious if that's a concern to the president, that 30-hour mark where some people are lowering the number of hours they give to their employees or hiring employees for a limited number of hours only, and if it's one that the White House would consider any change in keeping with some other changes taking place in terms of the delay.
Look, I think.
Okay, so there's the question. There's this, and of course, obviously, Obama is concerned. That's why he extended by a year the requirement that employers provide coverage, because he could see that all these full-time jobs are disappearing because of his plan. And so in order to postpone some of the damage until after the midterm elections, he decided to postpone that requirement. So it's already, he already sees that it's a problem. He just doesn't want to admit it, but he's trying to temporarily diffuse it long enough to help some Democrats get reelected, because he doesn't want them to have to grapple with this issue in the polls. But it's clear, it's obvious that this law is having a detrimental effect on full-time employment, particularly for lower-income people, which should be his constituents, right? So here is what Carney had to say about whether or not President Obama is concerned about the negative impact that his bill is having on employment, specifically employers trying to get around the law by converting their full-time employees into part-time employees, thereby exempting themselves from the requirement to compensate them or include in their compensation health insurance. Here, listen to this response, cut number 5.
I would say broadly that if you look at the economic data, the suggestion that the ACA is reducing full-time employment is belied by the facts. What the ACA allows is the opportunity for individuals who could not, prior to passage of the Affordable Care Act, afford insurance to get insurance. And it provides subsidies for those who need help in affording it, and it assists businesses in that effort so that they can provide insurance to their employees. And again, the broader data here does not reflect that assertion. I don't have a specific response to the story you're citing, but I think the data is very clear on this.
Now, this is just an outright lie. He's saying the data is clear that businesses are not favoring part-time over full-time work because of Obamacare. He's saying that the mere suggestion of that is belied by the data. No, it's not. It is confirmed by the data. Just ask some of these restaurateurs why they are doing this. I mean, where do they think all of these part-time jobs are coming from? All of a sudden, we're having record numbers of people getting part-time jobs. I mean, is this some kind of crazy coincidence that has absolutely nothing to do with the Affordable Care Act? Is that what they believe? Because the data confirms that that's exactly what is happening. In fact, the guy that's asking the question is saying that members of the restaurant industry are saying that this is why they're doing it. They're coming right out and saying, hey, we are replacing our full-time workers with part-time workers because of the Affordable Care Act. It's not like you have to read between the lines and figure out why it's happening, as if, that would be difficult to do. But the guys that are making the decisions on who to hire and whether to be part-time or full-time have come out and said, hey, this is what we're doing, and it's because of the Affordable Care Act. So I'd like to see the data that James Carney is looking at that supposedly contradicts what we know to be the truth. Now here, the reporter continues, because obviously he doesn't want to say, but you're lying. But he does follow up a little bit on that ridiculous assertion on this data. Here, cut number 6.
The 30-hour limit, though, is that one the White House has any plans to, or is even considering?
Again, I don't have a response to your specific story here. What I can say is that the data reflects that there is not support for the proposition that businesses are not hiring full-time employees because of the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, so here he repeats the lie, just in case you didn't hear it the first time. He's saying there is no support, zero support for the proposition that businesses are not hiring full-time employees because of the Affordable Care Act. That is an outright lie. I mean, I bet I can have businessmen call this show that say they're not hiring people because of the Affordable Care Act. But it makes intuitive sense because, number one, the threshold is 50 full-time employees. So if you have 49 and you specifically do not want to be subjected to the Affordable Care Act, then you're not going to hire the 50th worker. If you have 51, you're going to fire a couple to get below that threshold. That only makes sense. And of course, one way that you do it if you have 60 full-time employees is convert 20 or 30 of them to part-time workers to get underneath the $50 the threshold. After all, imagine how much does it cost if I have 50 employees and I've got to provide each one of them with health insurance. And let's say it would cost me $3,000 a year for the policy. So $3,000 a year times 50, that's $150,000 a year. Now, does the employer want to come out of pocket $150,000 a year? I mean, let's say I'm a restaurateur and I'm making $500,000 a year is my total profit from operating my restaurants with my 50. Do I want to lose a third of my profits? And of course, it might be a lot more than $3,000 a year. Maybe it's $4,000 per guy, $5,000. I don't know what it's going to be. Does anybody want to pay those costs? No. So now the other thing they can do is go back and cut back what they pay their workers. But what if they can't? What if a lot of these workers are minimum wage? You can't reduce their pay to offset your increased health insurance. So all you can do is reduce their hours. It just makes intuitive sense. Yet here you have the White House press secretary not only denying common sense, but saying an outright lie that there is no evidence that any employer anywhere in the country has decided not to hire somebody or to fire somebody because of the Affordable Care Act. It is making no impact whatsoever on employment. Okay, well, if that's the case, why did they delay the implementation by a year? Why not let it go through? And B, if it is making no impact, then explain why you're seeing this huge increase in the preference of employers, particularly in the restaurant industry, to hire part-time workers, whereas they never had this preference in the past. What is their explanation for why this is happening if they have proof that it has absolutely nothing to do with the Affordable Care